contrary and you're watching us on Google Hangouts or on YouTube or we will post this to our Facebook page. I have with me Anushay Hussain, who's a progressive commentator, frequent guest on the show, and Hadley Heath Manning, conservative with the Independent Women's Forum, right, Hadley?
That's right.
And also a frequent guest on the show. Okay, first topic, Hillary and the polls. There hasn't been anywhere near as much attention to the fact that the polls were calling it a tight race, a 1 or 2 point difference, and she beat him by almost 13 points. What is going on? Is that sexist or something else entirely? Anushay?
You know what, Bonnie, I'm so glad that you brought this issue up because I think more people need to be talking about it. The way the polls were making it sound before her nomination was announced was that it was such a tight race, we didn't know what was going to be happening, and I think it's a little bit of both. Maybe it's a little bit of sexism and a dash of denial. I mean, it was such a historical moment that we have just witnessed. You know, America really woke up to history in the making. So I don't know why the polls didn't reflect what the reality ended up being.
You know, people have been talking a lot about the enthusiasm on the side of Sanders, especially with his raking in a lot of the youth vote, and I think this may have just as much to do with age as it does with sex, because as we were discussing, Bonnie, some of the polls rely on calling home phones, and many younger people don't have home phones, but we would expect a very different result then from the polls. We would expect Hillary to have been leading all along. I do think ultimately, though, it may serve her well that what was depicted as a tight race ended up being an overwhelming victory for Clinton, because now she has this headline that she overcame, and she had a much bigger margin of victory than was expected. And the expectation game can be a big part of our politics.
So as she moves forward, her job now is to get the Sanders voters to embrace her. The media take anyway is that there's just not the excitement around her as there was around, you know, young people attracted to Sanders' message of more government assistance in the form of free college tuition. How does she get those voters if she can, Anushay?
I think the really important thing that Clinton has to do now is because, just like you said, the millennial voters that Sanders has are very passionate, very educated, very informed, and increasingly very angry. I mean, a lot of them believe that this was a conspiracy by, you know, the delegates just handed the victory to Clinton, and Sanders didn't really get a fair shot. You know, Sanders needs to hurry up and speak to his supporters. He needs to concede, speak to supporters, because everybody has to be united going into the convention and coming out of the convention. United front to take down Trump.
Hadley.
Well, both parties are struggling with party unity in a very non-conventional election season, I would say. So ultimately for Clinton, it's not just about the policy matters of shifting left, but it's also, I believe, a stylistic change that she may make. Ultimately, I expect we will see, and we have already seen, I believe, just since the primary last night, a little more enthusiasm on the Clinton side. I mean, when she was making her speech, the crowd there was, I believe, electric in a way that maybe Clinton's crowds have not been so far this election season. So I believe if I were a Democrat, I'd be more optimistic about party unity. That's something that Republicans are going to struggle with come November as well.
So what, moving forward again to the general election, what's your take? My guess, if the election were today, and of course there are many days to go between now and early November, but the way things look to me is she's going to just absolutely beat up Donald Trump and win women. She'll definitely win women of color, and she will win older women. She might win younger women. She may even win white married women, which is traditionally a Republican stronghold, because of what Donald Trump has been saying about women, because his wife posed nude for a men's magazine, because of all these things that are not appealing to women about him, you know, calling them fat, calling them gross, calling them disgusting. talking about Megyn Kelly in the way that he did. So going forward, Hadley, how can he turn this around?
Oh man, that's a good question. But what I see in Donald Trump is a really surprising and different type of political candidate than we've seen in any previous election, at least elections that I've been paying attention to. He's really built a personal brand, and he's mastered, I believe, the media in a way that we haven't seen before. Every one of those missteps or gaffes or I believe inappropriate comments that you mentioned, he has survived through them. He's continued to advance. Many conservatives have underestimated him. They underestimated him throughout the primary season. And so I would hesitate to underestimate his appeal in the general election as well. You know, we shouldn't forget that Clinton has very high unfavorables with the American public. I'm sure a lot of voters feel that their vote will be the lesser of two evils in this election cycle, as we have the two most unpopular candidates in history. But ultimately, Trump seems to try to pivot and move forward to the next thing constantly without, you know, even this week he said he wasn't going to comment anymore about the judge in his case about Trump University. He wants to move on. He wants to get on to the next thing. But it will be up to the Clinton camp and the Democratic Party to try to remind voters throughout the rest of the general election cycle of these many things that he said and done that are offensive to a lot of Americans.
I'm going to be sorry, go ahead. I'm going to be cautiously optimistic. You know, there was a point where I thought Trump he's such a bully. And Clinton kind of hadn't given that speech we were all expecting her to give, but then she delivered it on Thursday. You know, that speech in San Diego that was really billed as a major foreign policy speech ended up being such a fantastic, strategic, and careful cut down of Trump. So, and I loved what she said last night, that her mother always taught her to, you know, stand up to bullies. So I feel like she's gearing up, she's getting ready. And what we're witnessing, in addition to what could possibly be the end of the GOP party, I feel like Trump's campaign is kind of unraveling. There's been a lot of talk about the fact that he doesn't even have a communications team in place. You know, nobody speaks for him. He speaks for himself. And I think, yes, this whole thing about playing the media at its own game was really great, but we're down to the wire now. The lines have been drawn. And I think when it comes to it, Trump's campaign is exposing the fact that he is not a politician and he has no idea how it works.
But he did, no, he's not a politician. He's a reality TV show star and continues to be one as he's trying to become a politician. But last night he read off of a teleprompter, something that, of course, the Democrats could. I was thinking they're going to be Hillary PAC ads showing him making fun of teleprompters and people who use them, and now, of course, he's using one, and he will be. Is that a sign they're reining him in?
You know, when it comes to Trump, I think he's just evidence of how divided the American public has become, because there are things that he does that seem hypocritical to some people, and there are things that he does that are insulting. And yet, some of the things that we may find most offensive, or some of the things that left-leaning folks might find very offensive, they think this is the end of Trump, the end of his campaign. It's those same things that he does and says that actually increase the enthusiasm behind him, along with his base of support. And so many of these things that he's doing, they cut both ways, and it seems that Trump supporters, at least those who've been in his camp from the beginning, are ruthlessly loyal to Trump, and anything he says or does, they can find a way to justify or excuse. So many of these voting blocks that we pay a lot of attention to, whether it's women or people of color, yes, I believe ultimately Clinton will prevail with those groups by heavy margins. But there are other groups of voters in the country, including white men and working class men, where Trump has had the advantage in polling. And so if he manages to win those groups by the same type of margin that Clinton is going to win, I believe ultimately women, especially young single women and people of color, then we may have a very tight race after all when it comes to the presidential election. But that just speaks again to how divided the country is when it comes not just to our politics, but really what we want ultimately in a leader.
We definitely are. You know, I've often thought that they should cut off both coasts and unite them, and that would be one country, and the midsection would be another, because there is, you know, the information age, and people have very varying opinions in this country. Thank you both so much for joining us. Have a great rest of the day, and we'll be seeing you soon.
Thank you so much,
Thank you.
Bonnie.